Alrighty. So Meg Chipola is a certified grief counselor, and she holds a master's degree in Thanatology, which is the study of end-of-life issues, bereavement, death, and dying. So in 2015, her mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and for 1 year, Meg was her mother's caregiver. And after her experience with palliative and hospice care, she was called to pursue studies in the field. And in order to walk beside others who found themselves facing a terminal illness and or the death of a loved one. So let's go ahead and welcome Meg.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Maddie. We appreciate that. I am going to just dive in with my presentation and share my screen. Give me one moment. Can everyone see navigating anticipatory grief?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thanks. So again, I just want to welcome all of you and thank you for taking time out of your evening, your Monday, to spend an hour with me talking about an uncomfortable topic, but one I think is very important to discuss. Anticipatory grief and how cancer patients and their loved ones can navigate this very real grief experience. And as Maddie said, quick introduction, I am a certified grief counselor through the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals. I have a master's degree in thanatology, study of death, dying, grief, and bereavement. I live here in Thousand Oaks in Southern California, and I facilitate grief groups as well as do individual grief support as needed here at my office in Thousand Oaks, and I also do over Zoom. But more importantly than my background and education is really the experience I had with my mom when she was diagnosed with cancer in 2015. It came as a complete shock to myself and my family, and I'm an only child, so it fell to me and my grandmother to really take care of my mom as she was getting sick. And unfortunately, her form of cancer was extremely aggressive, and it quickly spread throughout her body and eventually spread to the lining around her spinal cord and brain. And she died in June of 2016. And as you can imagine, in my mid-30s, that it completely changed my life, losing my mom. And it set me on a different path. I was really, it was important to me to immerse myself in the grief community, having gone through that experience. I went through a grief support group as a member, and then I went back and I became a volunteer co-leader for other groups. And that is why I pursued this, this degree and then getting my certification. And I really say this because I want you to know that I'm coming from a place of firsthand experience. I've lived what you're going through as a caregiver for someone who has been diagnosed with cancer. I saw what my mom's grief and our anticipatory grief as her abilities changed. And so how real this is and how important it is to talk about it. So I'm a girl who likes a roadmap. So just to give you an idea of where we're headed tonight, we're going to try and understand a little bit better what is meant when I say anticipatory grief. What does it look like? What are the signs and symptoms? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? How can you recognize it and identify it? How do you cope with it and not get stuck and still be able to continue on caring for your loved one or going through treatments, wherever you find yourself? And so something I want to take a small pause here, and just something to keep in mind is, why are you here tonight? Why did you decide to spend an hour on a Zoom call on a Monday night in November. Thanksgiving's next week. Where are you in your journey, and what do you hope to gain tonight? Just something that I like to sort of take a moment and really think about and recognize. And I welcome questions if you want to pop them in the chat, or we can wait till the end. I know Maddie asked you to keep yourselves muted, but so I'll do most of the talking until the end, but just if you have questions, I definitely welcome them. I was hoping that this could be more of a dialogue. So let's start. So I thought I wanted to start with what grief is on its own. And grief is really, it's a normal and natural reaction to any loss, not just death, which is what we associate it with, but any loss. That could be a divorce, that could be if a loss of your job, or if you had to quit your job because you were in treatment and you couldn't continue on. Moving to a new city, losing your support system, there's loss with that, a breakup of a relationship. All of that is grief is a reaction to any loss, not just death. That sadness that we feel when we experience loss is grief. And it affects us in many, many ways, emotionally, physically, cognitively, or how we think or have trouble thinking and remembering things, how we behave and how we act. And even spiritually, there are ramifications when we're grieving. So what then is anticipatory grief? And here's the thing about grief. Although we think of it as something that really happens after a death, it really often begins long before death arrives. It can start as soon as we become aware that there's a likelihood that someone is going to die, or that we are going to die from an illness that we're diagnosed with. So really, once death is on the horizon, even just as a possibility, it's natural that we begin to grieve. And though this is different than grief that you experience after someone has died, it can carry many of the same symptoms of regular grief: sadness, anger, isolation, the forgetfulness I was talking about, the brain fog, depression. These are all complicated emotions, and they're often coupled with exhaustion that comes with being a caregiver on top of having these feelings, or the stress of going through treatments yourself for cancer. And so that this grief is slightly unique in that it can be experienced simultaneously by both the patient, the person who is been diagnosed with cancer, and the person's loved ones, family and friends. So as we become aware of that looming death, and we're recognizing the changes that are happening, we really start to grieve the many losses along the way. And so why is it so powerful? Why can it really take you down? One thing is because your thoughts are jumping around. You're thinking about the past, you're thinking about how things were, how things are now in the present. And then you're also thinking about the future. How long can I do this? How long can I feel this way? These conflicting thoughts can make you worry about yourself, and people might notice that you're distracted and think that you have a problem. Like, why can't, so-and-so hasn't died, why are you so upset? Rude, kind of insensitive things like that. And there is nothing wrong with you. You're grieving. It's a natural process when you're going through this. Every day is a day of uncompleted loss. And so what I mean by that is you're wondering if this will ever end. There's no end in sight. It's sort of, you're in it for the long haul. So you might wonder if you'll survive all of these intense feelings, this exhaustion that you're going through. You want to do your best for your loved one, and you are struggling. you might feel like this anticipatory grief is really starting to tear you apart yourself, as the caregiver or as the patient. Again, this is a really unique experience, unique grief experience, because all parties experience it and feel it and go through it. Another thing is the time factor. It can start to really grind down on you, since you don't know when there will be an end, if there will be an end. You're just sort of constantly on high alert. And the people in your life may not understand that. They may not understand the feelings that you're going through, and they're wondering, again, why you're grieving. Obviously it's very upsetting to know that someone you love is sick, but no one's died, so why are you so sad? And it's just people sort of like, unless you've been there, you don't know. And at the same time, trying to explain your feelings and how your thoughts is difficult, trying to explain them to other people, because you can hardly keep track of them. One hour you're sad, the next minute you're hopeful, the next minute you're angry. It's hard to keep up with everything because it's constantly changing. Suspense and fear become a part of your life. You fear that others won't understand, so you keep your feelings to yourself and sort of bottle them up and don't find an outlet to express these emotions. They call this stuffing your feelings, kind of burying them deep down. And so you start to feel full of worry and insecurity and sadness, and just the uncertainty just completely rules your life. Again, both for the patient and for the loved ones caring for the patient. A lack of an endpoint. Again, there's no way to know when someone will die. And you don't want to die. You don't want your person to die. And it just feels like, how can I keep going? So you're just constantly on a heightened state of alert. And sometimes you have to put your life on hold. Maybe you need to take a break, a leave of absence from your job to care for your loved one, which are all obviously things you're willing to do, but it takes a toll. You lose some of your identity, and your caregiver becomes your identity. Cancer patient sort of becomes your identity, and all of these changes can just be so much when you're dealing with also not feeling good and being exhausted. And then you feel sorrow and hope at the same time. And hope might be the most unique aspect of anticipatory grief, because while you're grieving, you're also hoping that a new treatment will work, a new drug will be invented, or a new surgery will be developed, that you or your loved one will experience a miraculous turnaround, and this will all go away. And so that's a huge part of anticipatory grief, is that hope that you hold on to while you're feeling all these emotions. So some examples that are after of anticipatory grief after specifically a cancer diagnosis is the loss of your abilities and independence, both the patient and the caregivers. Loss of stability and security. Maybe, again, you had to leave your job for an extended period of time while you take care of a loved one or while you go through treatments. Loss of your ability to cognition and think. They talk about brain fog a lot with chemotherapy, and also caregiving, because you're exhausted and you can't remember things and you have so many things to remember. Loss of companionship of a loved one that a loved one has always provided. Maybe they were your rock and now you are theirs. And that shift can be difficult and challenging. And I'm sure there are many other losses that you can think of as you think of where you are in your journey right now, that maybe resonate more than what I've mentioned. And they're all valid, and they're all part of the journey. So as I said, the symptoms of anticipatory grief can be the same that are experienced following a death. So let's kind of talk about the common signs of anticipatory grief. There's physical disturbances. Sleeping becomes much more difficult. You can't fall asleep, you can't stay asleep. Or on the flip side, maybe you're sleeping too much and you don't want to get out of bed. There are headaches, there's the exhaustion, loss of appetite from treatments or just worry, or overeating, indulging out too much because you just need some comfort, which is okay too. Shortness of breath, holding your breath. That was something that I know for myself, I did a lot. I would hold my breath, which led to dizziness. But all of these things are natural, and they are, pretty common grief reactions, anticipatory or after a death has occurred. There's obviously emotional reactions to grief, the sadness of what is changing, what you're losing, what they're losing, guilt, shame. Maybe you said something you wish you hadn't, maybe you did something, maybe you think you didn't do enough, you're not doing enough, you're guilty that you have to go do something else and you won't be able to take care of someone for a period of time. Anxiety, again, that heightened state of alert, you're always sort of on edge, constantly aware of what's going on all the time because you need to be able to react at a moment's notice. Anger at God, anger at yourself, anger at the person, resentfulness. Those are common reactions as well. We may not want to feel them, but they are natural parts of grief. You're yearning, constantly wishing that it could be different, remembering the old days and just yearning to be back in those old days and pretending that this isn't what's happening. Helplessness. You're at the mercy of your body and the treatments and your loved one's body, and that just feels totally helpless. And it's all really overwhelming. It's just truly overwhelming. All of these emotional feelings, these physical symptoms, all at the same time, ping-ponging back and forth. It's really challenging. And there are cognitive difficulties, and the inability to concentrate or to focus. I mentioned brain fog earlier. I know there's something called chemo brain, where you just you can't remember things. You can also do like obsessively needing information. You're scouring the internet for a treatment or more information or another doctor, or just constantly researching other things to try. You could be in denial, just total disbelief that this is happening, everything is fine. And on the flip side, sort of hyper focusing on what if this happens, what if that happens, how am I gonna handle this? All of that, again, is really normal, really natural reactions. We don't like them, but they're there and they're normal. Sometimes we change our behavior and the way we act. We withdraw. We don't want to see friends and family. You maybe used to be a really social person. You'd go to lunch with people all the time or go have brunch with friends. And now you just have no desire to go out and do anything or be social. It feels like too much work. Spending more time with family and friends, maybe that can be comforting, to spend as much time as you can around people who love you and support you. That's a wonderful thing. And maybe you weren't like that before, but now you feel driven to make that connection and keep that connection with the people around you. Crying is obviously a big one. I and still do cry sort of out of the blue. Nothing, I don't even know what triggers it anymore, but just crying. And on the flip side, the inability to cry. Some people feel bad that they haven't cried or that they're not crying. It's all okay. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. And you're the expert on your grief, not me. And so what you're doing is recognizing those signs and symptoms for yourself so that you can find ways that work for you to get through that moment. And lastly, spiritually, there can be, some changes in your faith. You might have once turned to your faith or your religion for answers, and it was deeply comforting. And now you are sick or your loved one is sick, and you're questioning, how can this happen? Why is this happening to me, to him, to mom, to dad? Just really questioning your faith and what it really means. Find yourself bargaining with God or the universe or your higher power, whatever you believe. Please, if this round of treatment works, I promise I will XYZ. Just please let this work. And then you could also be searching for miracle cures or other, any special beliefs that you can find. Just desperately searching for a miracle that's going to cure you or cure your loved one of cancer, and then life can sort of just go back to how it was. So those are all, you might recognize some of those in yourself. You may have other ones that I didn't mention. Again, it's really just helping you identify where you're at in your journey, and what's really going to help you in those dark moments. And that's why, again, it's an individual reaction. Every one of you grieves differently, and you are all doing it right for you. So I think that that's something to keep in mind. You're not doing it wrong, even if it doesn't look like how someone else is grieving. You could be grieving the same person, and it will look very different because you are both separate individuals with separate experiences. So and again, like, there's no emotion that you could name which might not be present in anticipatory grief. There are so many emotions that come up when someone's diagnosed with cancer. And I want to acknowledge that there may also be moments when you wish that it would just be over. You just want it to be done, because you can't bear the pain any longer. Physical pain, if you're the patient, the pain you're causing your family, if you're the caregiver and loved ones watching your loved one in pain, you just want it to end. And that, even though that doesn't feel good to say out loud or to think, it's normal. You don't have, please don't feel bad or feel guilty if you have that thought. That's completely normal. We are human, and our psyche can only take so much. So be gentle with yourself. I think if you take nothing else away from my talk tonight, please take that. Be gentle with yourself through this process. And speaking about difficult topics, I think something we have to talk about when we're talking about anticipatory grief is death. It is a difficult topic. Nobody wants to talk about death. Nobody wants to acknowledge death. We don't want to believe that our loved one is going to die. We worry about, if we bring it up to our loved one, that it will undercut their will to live if we bring it up, or that we're giving up on them. And as the patient, you'll worry that you're going to upset your family and friends because they're going to think you're giving up. um, it can feel like you're just giving up on all treatments and you just don't want to live anymore. I offer you that a few things you might consider is that some people crave reassurance. Some people at the end of life are comforted by the thought that they will be embraced, not abandoned at those last moments, no matter what happens, that their family is going to be with them to the bitter end. And they need to hear that. Maybe as the caregiver, you need to hear that they want that. And some people want to talk. They may get tired of sort of dancing around the subject or tiptoeing around because they want to keep up a strong front and keep a stiff upper lip and, everything's going well. But it just feels like there's the subject matter is looming so large. It's like an elephant in the room that everybody is tiptoeing around but knows it's there. And so some people would rather just have the honest conversation and talk about their wishes or talk about their fears or what they're worried about. It can be exhausting to be inauthentic or not genuine when you're having these thoughts and it's helpful. You're someone who wants to talk about things. It can be really difficult to have these surface conversations when something as important as life and death is it's sitting in front of you. Some people are afraid to talk about it and they don't want to talk about it. They just want empathy. They just want they're stifling their own fears and concerns of leaving their loved ones behind, about how their cancer will progress and how they're going, what facilities are they going to lose control of, faculties are they going to lose control of, the fear of becoming a burden. Nobody wants to become a burden on their family or friends. Leaving things unfinished. If there were tasks or plans that are put on hold, you can't complete at this time. And I think the number one thing that some people want to talk about but are afraid to talk about is the fear of a painful death. I think that's one thing everyone fears the most. And so sometimes being able to share your fears and expressing your beliefs about death can help everyone involved in the conversation feel a little bit less overwhelmed and a little less alone. And again, this is a very delicate subject. It's a very delicate balance when talking with someone about death and honoring where each person in that conversation is coming from. Not everyone is going to be okay talking about it, and that's okay. That's their right. And I also offer that it's okay to try and broach the subject, whichever side of the table you're on. And so I want to offer also as well some approaches that you can take and when having this particular difficult conversation. Again, clearly not everyone who has a terminal cancer diagnosis is ready to talk about death. That is a period, end of sentence. So how will you know when to talk and what to say? Again, as the patient or as the caregiver, really all you need to do is open the door to the conversation. And if they push the door open further, it's to really stay there in that moment and be present with them if they want to talk about it, if they want you to know what their wishes are. So look for openings. Maybe a song you heard on the radio on the way over, or a book you just read, or the way someone else's illness is unfolding, and maybe they've already passed, unfortunately. You can use those smaller openings as a way to broach the subject. And by you broaching the subject, you're signaling that you're ready to talk about it, and that you don't need to be protected from their feelings and their thoughts. You're open yourself to having this difficult conversation with them because you care. Broach the topic gently. Start with very simple questions. Try to get away from yes and no. So ask things like, what do you worry about? Is there anything you want to talk about? How can I help you in this moment? And try not to, when they answer you, try not to rebuff any tentatively expressed fears with hearty reassurances like, oh, that's a long way off. Or, of course you're not a burden. Don't worry about that. That sort of shuts down the conversation, and it's just a little dismissive. If they're willing to open up, I ask you to try and meet them where they are. Because if they decided to open up and share with you, that means they're a little bit ready. It's like they're dipping their toe in the waters of this really challenging time and difficult conversation. So it might help to ask specific questions, depending again on your loved one's comfort level and receptiveness to the topics and your own. Ask, what are you thinking about your, this round of chemo? Or what would a good death look like for you? What are you hoping for? What are you afraid of? And then sharing your own thoughts on maybe what your hopes are for your own death. What would a good death look like for you? Just having these open conversations can really go a long way for people to connect and not feel like they're alone in their thoughts. Seek spiritual counsel if that's something that speaks to you and that's part of your faith. Even if it hasn't been a constant part of your life, some people turn towards their faith, and I say embrace that if that brings comfort to you and your loved ones. Ask advice from hospice. They know how to help have these conversations. They have them often. You can ask your doctor to help, or your loved one's doctor to help. Some of them know how to have this conversation, but it's not unusual for doctors to shy away from talking about death because they are determined to try everything, and death is not an option. Death is failure. So I implore you to tread lightly. If you know your doctor and he'll be open to helping you with that, then absolutely. But it's not, as in my experience, hasn't been as common. And then lastly, kind of for this conversation, let it go. People slip in and out of denial during the course of an illness, and even during a single conversation. You can say one thing and want to talk about it, and then all of a sudden it gets too real and you shut it down. So sometimes it's just simply too hard to think or talk about death, and that is okay. Let your loved one end conversations that feel simply too difficult to continue, and allow them to hold on to any comforting thoughts or any fantasies about what might happen. That's okay too. Again, each journey is different, and you're all doing it right. whatever that looks like for you. It's hard though. So after that hard, difficult conversation, can there possibly be any positives when you are dealing with anticipatory grief? And I think there can be. It can provide some unique opportunities, putting things in order, whether that be your own feelings and emotions, maybe resolving conflicts, family conflicts, friends dynamics that are really have been a struggle your whole life or that haven't been resolved. And this, sort of seeing where this might be going can be sort of the push you need to, say, have some of these other important conversations. Say, I'm sorry, please forgive me, or I forgive you for, thank you, I love you. And a way to say goodbye, that's important too. So how can we support ourselves while we're grieving, while we have this anticipatory grief? Again, as I mentioned earlier, we all experience grief differently. Something that I believe is that it's important to think about small things that you do that make you feel better and build those things into your day, whether that is going for a walk in the morning before everybody gets up. It's fall now, so it's nice and brisk in the morning. See the leaves falling. Getting out of the house, even if it's just for 10 minutes to go to your local coffee shop and grab a cup of coffee, maybe a scone, sit there for 5 minutes before you have to get back. Find something creative to do. If you like to color, they have all these adult coloring books nowadays. If you like to draw, sometimes I would just sing. I would turn on my radio and find a song that my mom and I loved, and I would sing it kind of at the top of my lungs. And that, it just felt like a release. So that was something that helped me feel better. Animals can be extremely healing. They have a sixth sense when you're struggling with your emotions. And so it can be really good to snuggle with them, pet them, go outside and play if you have a dog or if you have a really adventurous cat. Spending time somewhere that has meaning for you and your loved one, or just that you find comforting. Maybe there's a park that you would always walk around, or a certain antique store that you always loved to go to and just sort of lose an hour in. Try and do that. Try and get yourself there. Nature is always healing. Nature is always an amazing place to go when you're feeling overwhelmed. It can be extremely soothing and calming. And then I do a lot of meditation and breath work. I know that's a little maybe woo-woo for some people, but it works for me. Again, like I told you earlier, I'm a breath holder. So remembering to breathe, taking a mindful moment to actually like take a deep breath and let it go has been really calming for my nervous system in times when I was really overwhelmed with the grief I was experiencing and the exhaustion of caring for my mom. Exercise is always great too. So again, I offer you some basic self-care to take with you. Crying, always a nice release. I think it's cleansing to let out your tears. And if you are not a crier, that is totally okay too. Not everybody cries. There's nothing wrong with that. Trying to eat well, obviously, take good care of yourself, your body. Some lose your balance, some people lose your appetite, some people overeat. So just try to find a good balance that works for you. Sleep is huge. it can be so difficult when we're grieving. Again, you can't fall asleep, you can't stay asleep, you sleep too much. So one thing to do is be mindful of what you ingest and what you and when. Obviously, caffeine. Maybe don't have tea or coffee in the afternoons. Watch your alcohol intake. That can be really wreak havoc with your sleep patterns. Exercise, again, is a great way to relieve stress and can have a positive impact on sleep. And then I found it helpful to have like a nighttime routine. Like I always did the same things right before bed. And just creating that routine felt good. And it helped me sort of wind down and tell my body that, okay, now we're getting closer to time to sleep. So sort of training it in a way. And find support when you're grieving, whether that is a really good friend or family member who you know can hear your grief and hold it with you. Absolutely talk to them. I'm a big fan of support groups. I know that the cancer support community has several support groups, and I love that. Reach out and take advantage of those, because a lot of healing can be done in a group with other people who understand exactly what you're going through and where you're at. It's incredibly beneficial if you are someone who can talk in a group to use that tool. And if a group is not your thing, find an individual grief counselor for extra support. Find someone who's outside of your immediate support system, who is an objective observer of the situation, to really help ground you in the moment and help you, just give you some extra support. So as we wrap up, I want to just take these little reminders with you. Anticipatory grief is totally normal. You are allowed to feel this type of grief. Acknowledge your losses. There is a lot of loss going on when someone is diagnosed with cancer, someone you love is diagnosed with cancer. Even though death has not occurred, you're grieving. There are big losses that are happening. Connect with others. Like I said in the prior slide, find your people, someone you know and love that can really hold your grief with you, or find a group that you can go talk to. It's so easy to feel isolated and alone. So finding other people who understand the challenges you're facing can really be healing. Anticipatory grief does not mean that you are giving up. As long as you stay present for your loved one or loved ones, again, whichever side of the table you're sitting on, you're not giving up on anybody. You're acknowledging that things are changing and that you are having a reaction, a normal reaction to those losses and changes. Do your best to find a way to spend all of your remaining time together in a meaningful way. None of us are guaranteed how long we're here. So make it all meaningful as you can. Have those difficult conversations. Say, I love you. Say, I forgive you. Say, thank you. Communicate. Keep those lines of communication open, so that everyone can sort of better understand where everyone else is coming from. Take care of yourself using some of those self-care techniques. Take advantage of your support system. Say yes to counseling. And something that I really want to say at the end here is that feeling that sense of relief is normal. Again, like, wishing, when will this end, wanting this to just end because it's too painful to watch. That's totally normal. Don't beat yourself up for feeling that way, for having that thought. You're not a bad person. You are a human person, and that is a normal reaction to an incredibly difficult situation. So I put in this quick mindfulness activity. If you want to take it with you through your day, it helps in any situation. Really, it's just about creating that break when your emotions and your thoughts are chaotic and you can't catch your breath and you're just spinning out of control. Just having a moment where you can stop and create a little space between yourself and those emotions, it will help you sort of build this stable base and help you, as you practice it more, create some resilience in your struggles. So another thing that I like to do besides just pausing and taking a deep breath is creating a mantra. A mantra is just a few words or a short phrase that you can say in your mind or say it out loud. And it's just a way to connect you back to the moment and take a breath and then be able to sort of, okay, I'm ready to move forward. So a few here, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from suffering, may I have the courage to move forward. And if none of those speak to you, create one of your own. May I smile today. May I be grateful for today. Whatever resonates for you, try. And this in no way is intended to diminish the pain associated with loss, any of the losses, any of the grief you're experiencing. It's really just a way to acknowledge the pain that you're in and to just create a little space so that you can sort of ground yourself again and then continue forward, taking care of what needs to be taken care of. And I like to end all my grief groups with a poem. So I picked this one, or a quote or a phrase. And so this one's from Mr. Rogers, and I think it's pretty apropos. Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that's mentionable can be more manageable. When we can talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we're not alone. And you are not alone. So that is my presentation. I thank you for spending again your hour with me and listening. And I hope there was some helpful information for you there. And I'm happy to answer any questions as best I can if there are any.